To the Honourable Lisa MacLeod, Ontario's Minister of Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Culture Industries. We want to thank you for joining us here today for this fantastic announcement. Before we begin, I'd just like to remind everyone that we will be taking questions at the end of today's remarks. Just encourage you, if you do have a question, we'll be running it very similar to the Premier's press conferences. Just encourage you to put your name and outlet in the chat function below, and I'll individually unmute you when the time comes. And with that, to begin today's event, I'll turn it over to Minister MacLeod for some opening remarks. Minister, over to you.
Thanks very much, Derek, and thank you, Your Worship, Mayor Tory, for joining us here today for this important announcement, as well as Raja Khanna for Music Together festival and event that will be receiving some funding from this Reconnect Festival and Event Fund that we quickly pivoted during the pandemic to support drive-in, drive-through, and virtual programming across the province to safely reconnect Ontarians to do what they love to do best, which is listen to live music, and to support those in the industry that have been first hit hardest and will take the longest to recover. Today I'm announcing 86 events will be receiving funding from this Reconnect Festival and Event Program with more than $7 million of which will be going to festivals and events right across Ontario, including in the City of Toronto and the City of Ottawa. This Festival and Event Fund was part of an old Celebrate Ontario program that quickly changed during the pandemic. So in total, we have been able to invest over $10 million since the summer and fund over 100 events. And so this latest tranche of funding is going to sustain some operations right until the end of March and provide much needed support to a sector that has been ailing during the pandemic. So I'm really pleased to be here today again with Mayor Tory to talk about how this important funding is going to provide some relief and support to those in the City of Toronto who've been under lockdown since effectively last year. And so I want to turn it over now to Mayor Tory to talk a little bit about how festivals and events have reprogrammed and provided some relief to his constituents in the City of Toronto. Your Worship.
Well, Minister Lisa, thank you very much. And to Raja Khanna, who we're going to hear from in a moment. I just want to say how important this program has been and now continues to be with the latest tranche of funding announcements. A lot of people don't focus. There's been great focus, and properly so, on the plight of small business, the restaurant and hospitality sector, and many, many others who've suffered immeasurably because of the pandemic. But no sector has been hit harder than sectors that have that employ and artists and that put on events for people. And these are the events that we cherish the most in many respects, any time of the year. And this program did two things. I mean, first of all, it operated as a bit of a lifesaver in two respects. First, that it helped organizations to keep their activities going, and a lifesaver for people, because had we not had the advent, for example, of drive-in events that really couldn't have happened if it wasn't in the initial tranche, because if it couldn't happen without this program and things like that, I just think we would have had more people suffering from the sort of loneliness and the lack of contact that they're accustomed to from the different events that we're so used to having go on. And I should say that while I'm fortunate enough as the Mayor of Toronto to be able to speak today because we're the beneficiary of some of this, if you look at the list, it's province-wide. There were events in Hamilton and Georgina, and I mean, you just name it, it's all over the place. And it's all kinds of events, winter and light festivals and all kinds of different arts things. And so my real role today, on behalf, I think, of a lot of people and a lot of events and a lot of artists across the province of Ontario, is to say thank you to Premier Ford, to Minister MacLeod, because I think this was a program that, isn't a lot of dollars compared to some of the other ones that have been in place for the pandemic relief, but is really, really important to get some support to artists and to people who organize events, but also to bring some joy to people who have had very little joy in their lives during this whole pandemic situation. We've had so many events, and we're even in the midst now, to be frank, in Toronto, of looking at the calendar, because you have to. Events need a lot of planning. They need contracts to be signed, and we're looking ahead at the course of the pandemic and, understanding that there are going to be things that just still won't be able to happen this year just because the planning cycle is not such to allow us to be sure that you can have crowd scenes going on. Pardon me, I know that as I talk to these different organizations, this kind of a program, is not only going to connect people up, but it's going to connect these organizations to a lifeline that they very much need. And, you know, the events that are put on are not quite the same as in-person events, but I went to quite a few of them and went to some with the minister, and there's still a sense of fun. There's still a sense of being able to showcase whether it's musical talent or whether it's film or whatever. And these are things that I think are going to be very important to keeping those events alive. You know, I was talking to some people from TIFF last night, and one of the programs that's funded here is TIFF. And it's difficult when you're not actually having a film festival for real to keep the notion, the magic of a film festival alive. And you have to do that because otherwise you end up starting all over again. And I'm sure that's true in big cities and small towns, that events we're just used to having on the calendar every year that make such a big contribution to our economy are going to be funded in this way. So that you look here in Toronto, you have the Royal Agricultural Virtual Fair. I mean, and again, for our farm community and for the urban dwellers, that's an important event. You've got the Hot Docs Podcast Festival. Again, documentaries are popular. Normally they would have a festival in a big theater, shoulder to shoulder, that experience of watching a movie that is, you know, very unique. They're going to have a podcast festival instead, and people access this stuff differently. The Next Wave Film Festival for TIFF is one of the ones that's funded by this next tranche. And then finally, I'll mention our own Show Love TO campaign, which is something where we're just trying to get people in a big city of 3 million people to find ways in which they can, without violating any of the health rules, enjoy their city and sort of connect, as Raj will tell us is the case with the Sit By, I think it's called Sit By My Fire. He'll tell you more about that. And by the way, small business will benefit from this too. Smaller businesses involving artists and performers and events that they organize, and places where those events animate the street. One of the things we're doing is animating some of those streets with some big hearts. And that again is part of what's going to be funded by all this. So Minister MacLeod, again, may I say thank you to you for continuing with a program that did work. You know, oftentimes people point to government programs that don't necessarily work. This one worked. It worked well. It worked right across the province in communities big and small. And this is proof positive of the fact that while Lisa and I agree on many things, I will say we just can never quite bring ourselves to agree on hockey. And I would invite her to check the standings, but I shouldn't be provocative because she's just giving money to cities and towns across the province and to artists, and we appreciate that. And you know, even I will say a small prayer for those senators because they need all the help they can get. But thank you, Minister, for this program. It's a good program.
Yeah, and you of course watched that game the other night with the come from behind from the Senators, that 6-5 victory. You saw that?
Well, it was just an aberration.
Oh, okay. All right. Sure.
And it's my pleasure. I think we're going to call upon Raja Khanna, who has put together a program that I think, again, is quite unique and a good example. And there's nothing like hearing an example of one of the ones that will benefit from this program the minister is announcing today. And so over to Raja.
Thank you so much. And not just for the introduction, but for the support. Show Love is actually supporting this event as well as the province with a Reconnect Fund. It's a fantastic development for us. Last year, the ministry and Minister MacLeod supported musictogether.ca, which was our initiative to put much needed money in the hands of working musicians, across Ontario. And we've managed to raise $300,000, including from the province and from a lot of individuals in the music industry, and give away $1,000 each to over 300 artists in the last year. And we realized that was kind of half one side of the coin. We're supporting the artists, but the other side of the coin was supporting getting people out to hear and experience the art. And I think we've all realized that that's needed now more than ever. So finding ways to connect those artists to their fans in a safe environment is what this next tranche is all about, what this event is all about. Come Sit By My Fire is really, really about, again, supporting artists and putting some much needed money in the hands of musicians, but doing it in a way that allows the public and people to safely experience live music. And that is what is most exciting to us at Come Sit By My Fire and Music Together. We're thrilled that Show Love is also showing us some love. So we thank them for that and the city. And we can't wait to bring the people of Toronto out of their homes to experience a little bit of music.
Thanks so much, Raja, and thank you, Your Worship. Again, what we've seen over the past 11 months in festivals and events pivoting to virtual, digital, online drive-in and drive-through has been absolutely incredible. I think this year was one of the most programmed years that we've had at Ontario Place as a result of that. And in my own city, going to Wesley Clover and watching some of our tourism operators pivot, like the Saunders Farm, in making sure that there was a Christmas light show that people could drive in and drive through. So I've seen and I've experienced the creativity of the people of Ontario. And I know that it's been a difficult time, but I think this Festival and Event Fund has really been inspiring to me. And I think it's brought a lot of people together in ways that they probably would never have imagined a year ago. So with that, we're happy to take any questions. I'll take the easy ones. Mayor Tory will take the tough ones.
Thank you very much, Minister, Your Worship, and Raja. We will take questions from the media. If you do have a question, I just encourage you to put your name and outlet in the chat box below, and I'll individually unmute you. Alternatively, you can also use the raise your hand function as well. I'll just give it a few seconds here for any questions. Okay, Minister, our first question comes from Alex Dodge with the City News. Alex, I will unmute you. If you just accept on your end, you can ask your question.
Hello, Minister MacLeod. As you mentioned, the today's announcement will also benefit Ottawa. Could you explain more what that specifically is?
Yeah, so some of the festivals and events that we've supported, one very important one to me was Christmas Cheer event that as an annual breakfast this year pivoted to online and virtual, and we're able to raise money for, I believe, 18 to 22 different charities across Ontario, Ottawa, and they are receiving a grant here today to help cover those costs of just over $14,000. Some other events, Jazz Fest was able to receive funding. In addition, Wesley Clover was able to receive funding. So there have been a number of events and festivals that we were supporting, whether they were online or whether they were drive-in and drive-through. And I know during the most recent lockdown, some of them had to close and shutter, but we're still flowing the money because they had sunken eligible costs. And again, I wanted to reiterate my appreciation for all of those who have taken their operations into a very creative and new space in order to provide joy and some relief to the population. So some of these events are absolutely incredible.
Well, thank you so much. That was my only question. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. Minister, your next question comes from David Haynes. David, I will unmute you if you just want to accept on your end.
Hi, David.
Hi there, Minister. Hope you're well. To build on the mayor's hockey talk, a question about the OHL. The league had hoped to open by February 4th. That date has passed. Can you update us on the latest of talks between the province and the league in terms of reopening, what you're looking at, what the medical officer of health is saying?
Well, right now we've had a few different proposals that the public medical officer of health has not been confident with. So we continue to work with the OHL as well as others in the sports sector to try and get them back up and running. With respect to the NHL and the AHL, they had a 600-page proposal. It was very detailed. And so that sort of hit the threshold that we would be looking at for a province. So we are looking at ways that we can get the OHL back up and running, potentially with hub cities, and trying to make sure that there is hockey before the NHL draft season. So we're absolutely committed. We're working around the clock to see how this can be done. We know how important the OHL is to the cultural fabric of this province, and we recognize that many of these young players will go off and play professional hockey in the NHL or other leagues around the world. So we don't want them to miss a season, but we certainly also want to make sure that we're abiding by public health and making sure that anything that would be approved would be in the best interest of and best health and safety of not only the province, but also of those young athletes. So we continue to work, and when we get the green light, we'll make sure that the public is aware of it.
For that stage of reopening, you mentioned the level of detail that you were looking for from the league to ensure health and safety. Are there certain health metrics that are tied to this as well, in terms of that the hub city should be in a certain zone for the framework, things like that?
Well, that's something that we continue to work on with the league, as well as the chief medical officer of health. Certainly, we would love to see the entire province beyond green and beyond the framework. So we continue to look at that. There are different circumstances. For example, if you're in Ottawa, we're in the orange level, but our 67s have a secure ice pad and arena that is not shared by the public. So there are a number of different variables. Access to rapid testing will be obviously very important. And then making sure that we maintain the integrity of that hub, so that there aren't people coming in and out. And so the level of detail that we received in the early stages of the pandemic from the NBA, for example, to get our athletes back to training, and then of course through the NHL bubble, and now getting the AHL and the NHL back up, we now have a threshold that we can look at. And I'll just conclude on this final point. Last week, cabinet mandated me to start with the reopening process of seasonal activities, including sport hosting and festivals and events. So we right now are continuing to work with health on what that looks like, because as you can imagine, in my sectors, we were hit first and hardest, and many of them will take longer to recover. Just think of amusement parks, water parks, live music, for example. So that's where we're at on that one. But thanks, David.
Thank you very much, David. Our next question is actually for Mayor Tory. It comes from Mark McAllister with the City News. Mark, I will unmute you if you just want to accept on your end. You can speak freely.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. As we know, the province will be making their announcement with regard to the next step in immunization rollouts today. You have sent out a release again, and we've spoken about it in the past, about the city's setup of various clinics throughout the city. I guess it's up to 3 now that are physically set up. No word at this point, though, on if the staff will be ready for those clinics when those clinics are open. So are they, and will they be properly staffed should they be needed next week?
The staff will be ready. The clinics will be ready. Toronto will be ready as soon as the supply is available. We actually went through the exercise of hiring the staff, and we thought we might have more trouble than we did finding qualified people to actually be the people that ran these clinics and participated in giving the injections. And we're fortunate that we found very good people. The training process is underway. And so it is now just the case that we need to get onto the schedule. And I know the province is working very hard on this, as is the federal government, to allow us to actually put needles into arms. But the City of Toronto will be ready with staffed clinics. And of course, that will be added to by a network of physicians' offices and pharmacies where people will also get their injections, and various other ways that we will try to help with mobile injection clinics and the like.
Thank you very much. That's my only question.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark. Our next question comes from David Ryder with the Toronto Star. David, I will unmute you. Just give me 1 second to find you on my list here. There we go. If you just want to accept on your end, you should be able to speak freely.
Good morning, both. First question is for the minister. You mentioned Ontario Place, and people in Toronto and elsewhere have been waiting for quite a while to hear about your plans for redeveloping it and which company or companies are going to be involved. Is there anything you can share with us, an update on where we're at with Ontario Place?
Yeah, well, we're making progress. Obviously, we continue to work with His Worship Mayor Tory, as well as the City of Toronto, as well as other stakeholders. I hope to be in a position this spring in order to make an announcement on some of the things that you're talking about. Obviously, we're also very excited about Ontario Place. This is the 50th anniversary of Ontario Place, and it was obviously officially opened by former Premier Bill Davis. So obviously we want to make sure that we're acknowledging that important milestone as we continue to maintain operations on the existing site, but also look toward redevelopment.
Thank you. My follow-up question is for Mayor Tory, and it's on what the message we're going to hear today, I guess, from Premier Ford about reopening. And that's, have you heard anything from Minister MacLeod or the Premier himself? And also, will you be surprised if the Premier Ford does not accept the advice from Dr. Davila of keeping the restrictions in place for another 2 weeks?
Well, I can't speculate on more than what I've heard, which is, I guess, no more than informed speculation. But I would be surprised only insofar as that we did hear the Premier say yesterday, and he's been consistent throughout on this, that he would listen very carefully to the advice of not only his own medical officer of health, but the local medical officers of health. He's been a good partner in that respect. And so we'll see what unfolds today in terms of the actual decision and the actual announcement. But we just believe caution is the watchword for Toronto. And Toronto is different than other cities because of its size and the density of its population and various other factors that lead us to believe with the variants and so on, it's a time for great caution so that we can make sure this is the last lockdown, that when this one's over, we can say we're heading forward with these great events that are being funded and with summer and spring soon to come and all the good things that we don't have to have another lockdown. That's what we want to avoid. That would be the worst thing of all.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, David. And our last question comes from Brian with the Toronto Sun. Brian, I will unmute you. If you just want to accept on your end, you're free to speak.
Great, thank you so much. Good morning, Minister. Good morning, Your Worship. Two questions. First question is for the Minister. In terms of this funding, we know that some areas are reopening faster than others. How will any potentially reopenings in the affected health areas affect how this money will be used for events, whether they're held virtually or at in-person venues?
Yeah, so many of them have done drive-in and drive-through or virtual, and so that was basically the criteria. And we've been working with the sector to make sure that we're covering their sunk and eligible costs. We recognize how tumultuous this has been, and we wanted to make sure that that there was some sort of social relief for people during this pandemic. And again, it's been proven to be quite successful. In normal times, every dollar this ministry invests into a festival like the Toronto International Film Festival or Karasaga, or any event really that we have, we tend to see a $21 return on that investment into that local economy. So it is as much as it is about the cultural fabric and the social relief that we're providing, it is also an economic generator. And I think to Raja's point, when you look at one of these festivals and events, they're actually generating income for artists. And they're also generating income from some of those organizations like sound and AV that were not able to work. So it's keeping that social infrastructure and that economic benefit. So the one challenge I think that we did have was over Christmas when we did have a number of drive-in and drive-through events that we were supporting that had to be shuttered. But again, I just want to reiterate the remarkable resiliency of this sector and in their ability to pivot very quickly, that if they had to cancel a drive-in or drive-through, they really went online. And we had two remarkable events on New Year's Eve that I was part of through funding from the previous tranche of the $3 million I announced before Christmas. One was To Ontario with Love that we supported on TVO. It was a New Year's celebration with incredible Canadian talent, including the Bare Naked Ladies and Avril Lavigne. The other was a virtual Hogmanay festival, which was funded through the Ottawa Scottish Society that we supported. And so again, these events are really important to bring people together, but also to maintain that social infrastructure that we have, and then to continue to flow funding so that there is that economic benefit. So I often say this ministry is responsible for a double bottom line, the cultural fabric and the economic side of things, because we do in good times generate a $75 billion economy. And this funding is an extension of that during this period of time. And I know you had a question, I think, for Mayor Tory.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my second question is for the mayor. For years, you've advocated for tougher sentences on gun crimes, and earlier this year, you led the GTA mayors and chairs in calling on Ottawa for the same. What's your opinion, and how do you feel about the federal government's move to lower sentences for armed robbery, armed extortion, trafficking, and similar offenses?
Well, you know, it's funny because I think there's so many changes that have been made in the legal system. And I'm, for one, saying in particular for repeat offenders, and we have a lot of them with regard to firearms offenses, that they should be serving a long time in jail. And whether that happens because of minimum sentencing requirements, or whether it happens because judges, I guess, pay more attention to the reality of what's going on and the devastation that is being caused by gun crime in different communities, including Toronto, or otherwise, I just think we have to take a real, hard second look at what's going on. I include in that the bail provisions. I mean, it is scandalous what is going on with regard to the revolving door of people who the Toronto Police Service, and tell you, and others, because I met last week, as I do each week, with the big city mayors from Southern Ontario, and they will all tell you they have cases where there are people that are being arrested in the morning for a firearms offense and are out in the afternoon and are almost arrested again the same day or the next day. I mean, it's almost that bad. And so there's something seriously wrong with that, because these are people that are committing offenses, not to mention the example it doesn't set of a deterrence from this kind of criminal activity. So, sometimes I'm a lawyer and I understand that there have been decisions taken in the courts about about even the legality, let alone the effectiveness of these mandatory minimums. But I think somehow we have to look at making sure that the message is sent that if you commit a crime with a firearm, this is going to be taken very seriously. And that to me means a solid period of time in confinement. And it means that bail is something that, especially if you're a repeat offender, is just not going to be available to you. And so how it's done exactly, nobody's found the perfect method, but I do think that the message has to be sent more strongly than it has to date, that this kind of thing is just going to be found to be as unacceptable as everybody knows that it is.
Thank you very much. And that's all the time we have for questions today. And I'll throw it back to the Minister for closing remarks.
Okay, thank you, Derek, and thank you, Mayor Tory, for being here today. The City of Toronto obviously being a recipient of $4 million of this funding, and I think much needed respite for the people of Toronto, in addition to the wonderful festivals and events that we're promoting province-wide in Niagara Falls, in Ottawa, Blue Mountain, in Hamilton, in Windsor, and places in between. And so wanted to really thank you for your time here today, your friendship and your guidance. And certainly I know the days and weeks have been tough in the last little while. And so hopefully we'll be able to get people to experience some of these incredible festivals and events. And I want to thank Raja.
You're here.
For joining us as well. His organization is getting $248,000 to support live music, which is a sector that has been decimated during this pandemic. So we congratulate him for his forward thinking and for his commitment to the live music scene in the province of Ontario. And I want to congratulate all of the other recipients for reimagining what a festival and event would look like in a pandemic. And they've done incredible work and they've truly inspired me. So thank you to everybody. And we look forward to seeing you all hopefully soon in person in safer times. So thank you. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thanks, Minister. Bye-bye.